He built an empire from nothing, one of the few black billionaires who refused to bow to the system that said he'd never make it. But power couldn't protect him from hate. One night, a deal went wrong, and envy turned deadly. They didn't just want his money, they wanted to erase his name, his legacy, his life. Dragged to the riverbank, surrounded by men who smiled as they planned his end, he thought it was over, but fate had other plans. Because the last person anyone expected to save him was the maid they never even saw. Before the headlines, before the horror, he was simply Malcolm Reeves, a self-made billionaire who believed success could silence prejudice. Born in a small Mississippi town, he'd climbed from nothing. Dirt floors to marble offices, from counting pennies to signing multi-million-dollar deals. To the world, he was proof that determination could beat discrimination. But behind every polished speech and photo op, Malcolm carried the quiet weight of knowing that some people didn't see his brilliance, only his skin. That evening, as city lights shimmered over the river outside his penthouse window, he thought he'd finally made peace with it all. A celebration dinner with investors, a loyal staff, the illusion of safety. Yet beneath the laughter, there was tension, a deal too good to be true, a smile that lingered too long. Somewhere in the shadows, jealousy was turning into something far darker, and before the night was over, success would become his greatest danger. The dinner started like any other celebration, crystal glasses clinking, the soft hum of jazz spilling through the penthouse. Malcolm smiled, the way successful men do when they've learned to hide exhaustion behind charm. Across the table, investors praised him for breaking barriers, but their compliments carried a sting admiration laced with disbelief, as if his very success challenged the order of things. Then came the offer, a lucrative merger from a group he barely knew. Their spokesman, a man named Richard Haynes, leaned in close, his grin sharp and practiced. "You've done well for yourself, Malcolm, but partnerships like this, they need the right kind of leadership." Malcolm caught the pause, that weighted silence that didn't need explaining. "The kind that said you're good, but you're not one of us." He laughed it off, refusing to give the insult power. Yet when he declined their proposal, the air changed. The smiles faded. The room felt colder. One of the men muttered something under his breath, something Malcolm didn't quite catch, but the tone said enough. That was the moment he realized, this wasn't business. This was about putting him back in his place. Hours later, as the last guests left, he noticed one of their cars still idling outside. Headlights off, engine rumbling. He told himself it was nothing paranoia after a long night. But when his security guard called in sick, when the cameras by the elevator mysteriously went dark, that uneasy feeling grew louder. By midnight, he was alone in his penthouse, or so he thought. A faint noise came from the service hallway, a door closing softly, footsteps echoing against marble floors. He turned off the lights and listened. The steps grew closer, slow, heavy, deliberate. His pulse pounded. Then glass shattered. 3 men in masks burst in. No words, no warning. One of them struck him hard across the face. The world spun. They tied his hands, dragged him through the halls he'd built, past the paintings and awards that once symbolized victory. "You should have known your place," one hissed. The accent matched the man from dinner. The realization hit like a knife. This was revenge, not robbery. They shoved him into a car and drove toward the river, where city lights disappeared into darkness. Every bump on the road felt like a countdown. He tried to speak, to reason, but his voice was drowned out by laughter, cruel, hollow laughter that fed on his fear. As they reached the bridge, one of them whispered, "Let's see if money floats." The cold wind bit his skin. The rope tightened. He looked down at the black water swirling below, knowing this was how they planned to erase him, not just his life, but everything he represented. And then, a distant voice broke through the chaos. A flashlight beam. The sound of running feet. Someone was coming. But who would risk everything to stop them? The night air was razor sharp, cutting through Malcolm's soaked clothes as the men dragged him to the edge of the riverbank. His wrists burned from the rope, his body weak from the blows. City lights flickered faintly in the distance, freedom just out of reach. One of the men kicked him to his knees. The water below churned, black and endless. Money can't save you here. One sneered, gripping Malcolm's chin, forcing him to look up. Their faces were twisted with something deeper than greed. It was hatred, raw and unfiltered. They wanted to make an example out of him, to remind the world what happens when a black man rises too high. The first shove sent him forward, face first into the icy water. The shock stole his breath. Rope tangled around his arms, dragging him down. He fought instinctively, desperately, but the weight of it all pulled him under. The empire he'd built, the respect he'd earned, the dreams he carried for every kid who looked like him, it all flashed before him in blinding fragments. Above the surface, the men laughed, their silhouettes dissolving into fog. And then, amid the darkness, a faint light appeared. A voice shouted, trembling but fierce. The maid, Evelyn, the quiet woman who had cleaned his home for years, stood on the shore, clutching a flashlight and screaming for them to stop. They turned toward her, stunned. For a second, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then one of them lunged, shouting, "Stay out of this!" But she didn't move. Instead, she ran straight into the freezing river, water crashing around her waist, her hands reaching toward the man they had left to die. Malcolm's vision blurred as her fingers brushed his. The cold was consuming him, pulling him under again. He wanted to let go, but her voice broke through the water's roar. "Hold on, please, hold on." In that moment, between breath and silence, between hate and hope, one woman's courage defied everything they thought they could control. And as the river swallowed their shouts, a single truth rose above it all. Hate may drown, but humanity can still fight its way to the surface. The river didn't take him that night. Evelyn's cries had drawn attention, neighbors, officers, flashing lights piercing the darkness. By the time they pulled Malcolm from the water, his pulse was weak, his eyes half open, but he was alive. The men who tried to kill him vanished into the night, their names hidden behind power and privilege. For weeks, headlines called it a botched robbery. No mention of hate, no mention of race, just another unfortunate incident. Malcolm recovered slowly, his body healing long before his spirit did. He'd built his empire on the belief that success could shield him from prejudice, that money could buy safety. But as he stared at his reflection in the hospital window, he understood. No amount of wealth could erase the color of his skin in a world that refused to see his humanity. Evelyn, the maid who risked everything, lost her job soon after. No statement, no apology, just silence. Yet she carried herself with quiet pride, knowing she'd done what others wouldn't. Her courage became the light in a story meant to drown in darkness. Months later, Malcolm stood at a press conference. Cameras flashed. Reporters waited for him to speak, but instead of talking about business or money, he told the truth about that night, about the hate that tried to bury him, and about the woman who proved that humanity still had a pulse. His words echoed beyond that room, stirring something raw and uncomfortable in a country still learning to listen. Because this wasn't just one man's story, it was the reflection of a deeper wound. A reminder that power, success, even survival mean nothing when justice is still a privilege. And as the world watched, Malcolm ended with a question that still lingers. How many more rivers must we cross before we stop letting hate decide who gets to survive?